Welcome, Hong Khaou. Thank you so much for giving us a chance to see Monsoon. I found the film to be really moving and fascinating because it gives us so much emotional connection to this character and this very unusual story that at the same time seems to be a story that speaks to many of us about how we live our lives across borders and we build these complex senses of belonging and also maybe of being excluded, of being outsiders at the same time. And that seems to be a very experience that many people can relate to today, I guess. My name is Chris Berry. I'm from King's College London, where I teach Chinese film and also other East Asian film. And I also do classes on queer cinema. And I think that's why I've been asked to talk to you. And I'd like to start out actually with the cinematography, if you don't mind, because I think that's something that has a lot to do with this quiet intensity that the film seems to have. I was looking at the film again this morning and noticing how very often we are following the characters, we're behind them, we're at a slight distance from them, they're in sharp focus, but what's behind them is in much softer focus. And I also noticed how quite often when they're talking to somebody, we're able to hear much more than we would actually be able to hear if we were at that physical distance from them, if you see what I mean, in real life.
Yeah.
So these are some of the qualities that I thought might help to explain this sense of this intensity that I was talking about. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you worked with your team, the cinematographer, sound recorder, to build this atmosphere in the film.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. The cinematography was always was such a vital component to this film, because I think more so for Monsoon, because of the way the film is a very quiet and it's a very much an Kit's internal journey. So the language really has to work harder to help us access some of those internal struggle Kit has, and also to help kind of bolster some of the themes I want this film to have. So we were very conscious, me and Ben, the DOP, we were very conscious to make it aesthetically cinematic and beautiful, but to also kind of give it a language. And so I think one of the most important things, I think, like you said, is that I wanted this to be to have this kind of observational quality, but not from a distance, so that you're only a couple of steps behind him, but nevertheless you will feel what he is going through when those kind of poignant or heartfelt movement appears. And it was a really important thing to do that, to have a cinematic language, but also to feel like we are very much kind of next to him, really, but also in some ways a couple of steps behind him. And when I say a couple of steps, I mean in terms of the way the information unfolds. You're never quite sure, but eventually you will catch up.
Yes.
And we did. I mean, there was a lot. I mean, one of the big themes in this film was this kind of the struggle between the past and the present, and the kind of the old and the new, and so on and so forth. And we wanted to capture that. And here was this man who was, Kit, who's returning to his birthland, who doesn't speak the language, holds very little memory, and feels very much like a foreigner. And we wanted to shoot him with that sense, so to give a gentle separation between him and the city of his birth, so to speak. And so, like, we shot up reflection a lot, and then we slowly, and that technique is slowly removed as the story progressed, as he familiarized himself with the city.
And did you find, it's obviously everyone's going to say, oh, it's Henry Golding from Crazy Rich Asians. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the casting process. Not only, how easy was it to find the right person for the role of Kit, but also the role of Lewis, and generally putting together the right actors for a film like this, which requires, quite specific sets of background. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really important to find the right actors. Again, because of the nature of the film, it's a very quiet film, and it needed an actor to kind of give us give us access to those kind of nuance and quieter moments inside his head. And we searched extensively. Amy Hubbard, our casting director, we searched Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Canada. Like we really literally cast the net far and wide, and we didn't have any limitation in the sense that we was going to be East Asian actors or Southeast Asian actors, and then and we will pick the best person. And I didn't know anything about Henry. I didn't know anything about Crazy Rich Asian or another film he had made was a film called Simple Favor. So we didn't know any of those films hadn't been released. So we didn't know. He did tell us that I've been in 2 feature. To me, it just didn't really. None of it made sense to me, as in I didn't really know what they were. So we really put him. We really tested Henry a lot. I mean, we must have auditioned him about 4 times, and then I went to LA to then do a physical workshop just to work with him in one-to-one, and he really he had this. Henry isn't a trained actor in the sense that he comes from a trained background, but what Henry has is there's a lovely honesty to his emotion, and he himself understands this tug and pull between identities, so he was able to access those emotions. And I think maybe because he's not trained, I think he doesn't come across as mannered or maybe arch. There's an honesty. If you can get Henry to that place, I think the emotion is very honest.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, before, when I heard this film starred Henry Golding, because I had seen Crazy Rich Asians, so I was kind of like, oh, this is odd. But actually, the film totally convinced me that he can really act, which, to be honest with you, Crazy Rich Asians didn't. But that's another matter. It's a wonderful coup to have him in the film in this very, very, very different role. And of course, in your first film, in Lilting, you had Chung Pei Pei, the martial arts star, playing this elderly mother, and so another really interesting casting decision and interesting coup, if you will, getting her in that film. I wanted to also ask you about the role of Lewis and casting Lewis, and could you tell us a bit more about why you decided, for example, to make that role an African American character, and also again whether it was easy or difficult to find someone to play that role successfully.
It was hard to find Lewis, but eventually we found Parker, who he's American, but he lives in London with his family, family and 2 kids. And when we met Parker, it was pretty amazing. Actually, we in the early days we did a chemistry test between Parker and another possible actor, which we flew over from Australia, and he wasn't right, but we knew we had somebody quite special in Parker, but we had to kind of wait until we find the kit and to make sure the chemistry test was right. It's a good point. It's interesting. I think in the early drafts, in the very, very early drafts of Monsoon, the character of Lewis was a guy called Hank, and it was a white American guy going through very similar experiences as the Parker character, the Lewis character. But I think what was interesting is that as I was writing it, it felt that experience of it felt very, that is pretty much a dominant perspective that I've seen before. This, I guess, white American man who's the victim and the hero in the war and so on and so forth. And it just felt it felt really odd to do that. And I wanted Lewis's character, that when he talks about his father's pain, I wanted his father to be a victim as much as Kit being a victim in this. And it just, for me, it felt it was a more of a smarter way that Lewis was African American. I know there's a lot of details that I like. I mean, you know, like the fact that Vietnam was colonized by the French, right? And then another for 6 decades, and another 2 decades when the American entered the war. So and then for me, who is a non-white filmmaker, it felt very odd to talk about that kind of white American pain again, that we have it's just been a dominant perspective, really, when it comes to stories about Vietnam.
It certainly makes the film a lot more interesting. It really changes it. And that moment when, or that scene where Lewis talks about his father is, you know, has a tremendous impact. And it feels like something that we haven't seen before, I think, because of that. Now, I think something else that, you know, feels like we haven't really seen it before is this experience of moving through Vietnam and experiencing Vietnam as a gay man. And I wondered again about that. Now, obviously, with both your films, there's an autobiographical component in them to do with your own background, your family background, and also your sexuality. But then you choose to tell certain stories related to that. So I was wondering, you know, why, rather than it just simply being putting your diary on the screen or something like that, it's not that. So I was wondering why you chose to, or what you thought was you were doing with having them as gay characters rather than having, say, a straight character. And I also thought in general, I'd like to ask you, you said you hoped the film would touch on certain themes. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what those themes were and why you felt they were important themes of the moment.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's odd. I mean, Monsoon isn't, in some ways, it's incredibly personal because they're very much, you know, the struggles of Kit are very much my own struggles with my sense of identity and the tug and pull I have. And with I mean, I'm not Vietnamese, but my parents, you know, escaped from Pol Pot, and my mum never talked about that experience. She finds it very painful, and I find it very hard to access my past through her because of her unwillingness to talk about it. So that it's very personal, and I guess I mean, why, you know, why not? Why shouldn't he be gay? I feel, you know, I'm gay, I'm political. I think if you know, I wanted to have this story between 2 men, you know, and this sense of, you know, whatever the future is, I don't know, but a sense of kind of a love story of some sort. And I guess, what I wanted to do was that I guess I wanted kind of this, I don't know, I don't like to call it a love story, but there is a love moment between them, but I don't want the characters to carry this baggage of their sexuality, that they're not burdened by their sexuality. And I wanted to tell a story with characters like that. So the front of, I guess, the front end of the theme for the film is very much about identity and sense of identity. But what they are very certain about their sexual identity is that they are gay, and they have no problems with that. And they have, and I love that. I really love at the end when there's a kiss in the nightclub. I wanted it to be a wholehearted kiss, and I wanted them to do it, and do it in front of everybody in a setting that isn't specifically a gay bar, so to speak. And I wanted to celebrate that. And it's interesting you say that, and I think I hope, you know, people might see that differently. Maybe there is a maybe more of a queer slant in this. I don't know if it's conscious. I think aspect of it are like the way Kit moves across the country very freely, in a way that he isn't so kind of binded to the idea of love like a traditional heterosexual man would be, maybe.
It certainly makes it a very different story again of Vietnam. Just like, having Lewis as African American makes us see something that we don't normally see. So we're getting a very different story, I think. And
Yeah,
I
and
enjoyed that a lot.
sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I really like the idea that you have these two men who feel very much like foreigners in a foreign land. And there was something very odd that if Lewis was a white American, when you go to Vietnam, I think a lot of white Americans, they don't feel like they're foreigners. That there's almost a weird, maybe a colonial. Not to say everybody's like that, but I think there's an odd colonial attitude in that, maybe. And there's something I felt that it was really interesting to see that between Kit and Lewis. Sorry, and
yeah,
your other part. I'm just
no, that's okay. Let's move on now to another question, because you've already in a way touched on this. Shooting a scene like that in the bar of two men kissing in Vietnam. I'm wondering. I mean, I'm most familiar with the situation in the People's Republic of China rather than in People's Republic of Vietnam, but I know that you wouldn't be able to make this film in China very easily at all. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, was it an issue for the Vietnamese authorities giving permission for you to shoot this story, and if there were problems, were the problems because of it being a gay story, or were there other issues that concerned them and which had to be sort of sorted out?
Yeah, it's interesting because in order for us to film Vietnam, we had to go through a facilitating company, a Vietnamese facilitating company, Indochine, and they would help us get the permit. And in order to get a filming permit, we needed to translate the script, and it had to be read by I think 12 ministries of the Ministry of Culture, Foreign Affairs, so on and so forth, to then get a permit. It was really bureaucratic, maybe, and complicated. And so we were advised that in the early drafts that the intimate gay moments, which are not explicit at all, it's not even any nudity, to be honest, and we were advised not to submit those scenes because we won't get a permit. So by then the project had been greenlit. We have the budget, and it felt so odd to jeopardize that, right? Then we won't have a film. So we then decided to maybe shoot those scenes in another country, and we thought of going to Bangkok. But of course, it was such a small budget, and it means less days to shoot and less money, and everything was really complicated. And then by the time we arrived in Vietnam, so we did submit it without those scenes, but then by the time we arrived in Vietnam, the script had changed more. So then there's the last scene at the end where they kiss at the bar. That was like a new scene. And so I felt, well, we if they were okay with that scene, why weren't they okay with the two other scenes before that? So we pleaded with the company to resubmit, and eventually they okayed it. It's a really, and we were told that there had been a lot of far more explicit queer films made by local filmmakers, and ours is nothing in comparison to that. I think it may be because we are a foreign production company, they don't want to give out the message that Vietnam is this type of whatever. But having said all of that, they were very embracing. I mean, God, the Vietnamese crew were just incredible. They worked tirelessly. It's just and it gave our film so much detail. Like I think it made our film look a lot more expensive than the actual budget. So it's been it's been kind of weird, and they would put. I think they put 2 people from their office onto your crew to watch you as well. So it was really it was really odd, and we had to predetermine all the location we were going to shoot at, but also where we were going to point the camera. And it was just so tiresome to have to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It doesn't surprise me to hear that there was that amount of you know, wanting all the information from you. But it's interesting that they then decided, okay, let's go ahead and do it. And so that's really wonderful, I think. And the result, you know, is a film that, as I said, gives us a story of Vietnam that we've never seen before, and is really quite unique. And yet, at the same time, I think speaks to many people's experiences of having backgrounds in other countries, having complex senses of belonging and not belonging.
Thank you, Chris.